Welcome to Deep Dive, the Novel Aftershow. This is the podcast where we uncover the hidden layers, unravel the twists, and explore the worlds within words of the novels of, well, me, J. Kevin Tomlinson. Whether you've just finished the book or you're curious about what's inside, spoilers and all, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
All right, so today we're going to be diving into some really fascinating material. We've got it's like excerpts from a fictional story. Think like Indiana Jones, yes. But like the really brainy history professor twist. And it seems like there's a lot more going on here than just a good old-fashioned adventure story.
Yeah, it's like cracking open some ancient sarcophagus,
Right.
Never know what kind of secrets you get to find inside.
Exactly. And this time, it looks like we've got not one, but two secret societies.
Yeah.
The Jani and the Novensiles. And they seem to be, fixated on these weird metal canisters. So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to figure out, what's the big deal with these canisters and what are these societies all about, in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, the excerpts, they focus on this anthropologist named Dan Kotler, who kind of gets sucked into this whole conspiracy. Think modern-day Indiana Jones, but, with a couple more PhDs under his belt. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, this guy can probably, decipher an ancient scroll, climb a mountain, and still have time to whip up a gourmet breakfast burrito.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it turns out Dan's got this, family connection to the Jani.
Mm-hmm.
They're all about, preserving history and its artifacts, which on the surface seems harmless enough.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Until you realize they're the ones pulling the strings, controlling the symbols and narratives that shape whole cultures.
Right, exactly. They're like the ultimate spin doctors, but for history.
Oh, wow. That's a good way to put it. The spin doctors of history.
Yeah.
Which makes you wonder, how much of what we think we know about the past is actually true and how much has been, carefully curated by groups like the Jani.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought right there.
Yeah.
And then you throw in this splinter group from the Jani, the Novensiles.
Right.
Who want to be more than just, keepers of history. They want to, actively shape the world, according to their own vision.
And that's where things start to get a little dicey, right? So we're introduced to Senator Acosta, who's this freshman senator, and her team is really pushing this narrative about the U.S. border crisis.
Right.
But it's kind of hard to tell how much of it's actually true, It feels like she's being manipulated like a pawn in some bigger game.
Yeah, totally. And that's when things take a turn for the worse. There's this group, and it's hinted that they're connected to the Novensiles.
Okay.
And they abduct a group of senators, including Acosta.
Hold on, you're saying they kidnapped a U.S. senator?
Yeah.
To control the narrative?
That's to control the narrative.
That's next level manipulation, man.
Yeah. And what's even more messed up is they use this whole abduction to actually boost Acosta's political agenda later on.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're manufacturing these events to shape public perception. You know what I mean?
So it's how do we even know what's real anymore when information can be twisted around like that? It makes you think.
That's the question, isn't it? And it's something that, it's definitely relevant to our own lives too, right? Especially with all the social media and, fake news and stuff. We see this kind of manipulation all the time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We also learn about Dan's brother, Jeffrey. Seems like he might be tangled up in this mess as well.
Yeah. There's this whole, secret surrounding Jeffrey. He's super involved in the family business, Veller Kotler, genetic research. And it looks like they might have some ties to the Jani and the Novensiles.
So we've got secret societies, family secrets, political manipulation, and maybe some shady business dealings on top of it all.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, right?
Right.
Every time you think you've got it figured out, there's another layer underneath.
Another layer. And speaking of layers, things get really wild when we finally meet the chairman, this high-ranking member of the Novensiles.
Yeah, and guess what? Turns out it's none other than Dan's grandfather, Richard Kotler.
His grandfather.
Who everyone thought was dead.
Yeah. Whoa. Talk about a family reunion you do not want to go to. But seriously, how does his own grandfather end up as the head honcho of this secret society?
It's like a classic story, right? The wise old patriarch, but with a dark side.
Yeah.
And then you got to ask, why target his own grandson What's the motivation there?
I know, right? Was he, like, setting Dan up this whole time to get those canisters for the Novensiles? Is this, like, some messed up family legacy that Dan's been dragged into?
Well, it definitely seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the whole idea of family and legacy. What happens when the traditions and values that are passed down get twisted and corrupted?
Yeah.
What responsibility do we have to face that, even if it means going against our own family?
Heavy stuff. And it looks like Dan's gonna have to face those questions head on because these excerpts lead us straight to this hidden facility inside Cheyenne Mountain.
Cheyenne Mountain, huh? Talk about a place with some serious baggage.
It's like the ultimate symbol of, like, secrecy and power, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like they chose that location on purpose, to really amp up the paranoia and the stakes.
Yeah, and it's inside that facility that Dan and his FBI partner, Roland finally discover what Richard's really up to.
And what's that? What's the grand plan?
Well, they stumble upon this lab where Richard's working on some seriously advanced cloning technology.
Cloning. Oh, so that's where those canisters come into play.
Yeah, it turns out they contain, like, genetic material from these ancient figures. Richard calls them gods and kings.
Gods and kings. Wow.
Yeah. And get this, he's planning to use the cloning tech to bring them back to life.
Wait, he wants to bring back ancient rulers? Why? Does he think they'll, solve all the world's problems or something?
That's a good question. Is it some misguided attempt to, like, fix humanity? Or is there something darker going on?
It's like that classic science fiction trope, right? The well-intentioned scientist who unleashes something they can't control. But in this case, it's not just a monster. It's like the ghosts of history coming back to haunt us.
Yeah, the ghosts of history. But before we can even wrap our heads around all that, the facility is rocked by this huge explosion.
An explosion. Oh, man.
Yeah, and now Dan and Roland are trapped inside this sealed tomb, surrounded by these cloned figures. Talk about a cliffhanger.
Talk about a cliffhanger. We're left wondering, will they survive? And if they do, what happens when these ancient figures are unleashed on the world?
It's like the stakes just went through the roof.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, the ethics of all this, right? Cloning, genetic manipulation, bringing back the dead. Are we playing God? And who gets to decide what's best for humanity?
Exactly. It's like all these questions that science fiction has been grappling with for years are suddenly becoming very real, very immediate.
Yeah, it's a lot to ponder, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So while Dan and Roland are fighting for their lives inside Cheyenne Mountain, Liz is on her own mission.
Yeah, right.
She's following this trail of breadcrumbs that could, expose the Novensiles. But, it's a dangerous game she's playing.
Yeah, it's interesting how Liz's story kind of unfolds alongside Dan's, right?
Right.
We're seeing these, two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
You got the anthropologist digging into these ancient secrets, and then the investigator, piecing together this modern conspiracy. It's cool.
Yeah, and Liz's investigation, it really highlights this theme of, how far are we willing to go to find the truth?
Yeah.
She's bending the rules, using Dan's name to get information, putting herself in some risky situations.
She's not afraid to get her hands dirty, that's for sure.
No, not at all.
Remember how she used Dan's name to get those expedited DNA results?
Oh, yeah.
That took some guts.
Yeah, and it shows a different kind of courage, too, right? It's not like the physical courage that Dan's facing, but, it takes a lot of cunning and resourcefulness,
right,
and a willingness to, challenge authority to do what she's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like her methods are working.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that mysterious SIM card she got, it led her to that abandoned facility where those senators were being held.
Right. Yeah.
She, actually witnessed the abduction.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's like she walked onto the set of a spy movie, but for her, this is real life.
Yeah.
And it's clearly shaken her up, but it's also, fueled her determination to bring the Novensiles down.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how you'd react in that situation. Would you be totally terrified, or would you feel this this urge to expose the truth no matter what?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And as Liz digs deeper, she starts uncovering even more unsettling details. She finds all this evidence that it abandoned apartment, fingerprints, hair samples.
Right.
And the DNA analysis, it reveals something pretty shocking.
Wait, what did the DNA show?
Well, it suggests a family connection to Dan, but his parents are dead,
Right.
So it's this mystery that points to maybe another sibling or a connection to his grandparents.
Oh, wow. Which we know is huge.
Right.
Yeah.
Considering his grandfather is the head honcho of the Novensiles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Liz, she doesn't know that yet. She's still putting the pieces together.
Right. It's fascinating how we get both of their perspectives as the story unfolds, right?
Yeah.
It's like these two parallel investigations that are both revealing different pieces of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
It's like watching one of those detective shows where you get to see the detective's point of view and the criminal's point of view at the same time.
Right, you're right.
You know something's going to collide, but you don't know when or how.
Exactly. And that collision seems to be happening as Liz's investigation leads her to Jeffrey, Dan's brother.
Oh, right. The
Yeah.
brother who's running Veller Kotler genetic research.
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely something weird about that place. I remember Liz describing the building as like this super modern, almost sterile space, it felt like out of place among all the historical stuff they work with, you know? Yeah. It's like that contrast in design is hinting at the conflict at the heart of the story. Like preserving history versus this dangerous ambition to manipulate it.
It's a good point. And it turns out Jeffrey's been keeping secrets, too.
Yeah.
He tells Liz that his business partner, Christophe Villar, has been working with Richard, like using Veller Kotler's resources for his own agenda.
See, this is where the layers of deception get even crazier. It's not just the Novensiles pulling the strings. It's people within Dan's own family. People he thought he could trust.
It's like a betrayal on multiple levels, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Not only has his grandfather been manipulating him, but now his brother's involved, too. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about Dan's world.
Yeah, totally. And it reinforces that theme of trust or the lack of trust that runs throughout the story.
Right.
Like, who can you really trust when even your own family's keeping secrets?
It's a question that hits close to home, you know? Who are the people we trust without question?
Yeah.
And how would we react if that trust was broken?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And as Liz is dealing with all these revelations, Dan and Roland are facing their own challenges inside Cheyenne Mountain. They're desperately trying to find that escape route while also piecing together Dan's family history.
Wait, what are they learning about Dan's family?
Well, Dan discovers that his parents' deaths might not have been an accident.
What?
Yeah, it seems like they were targeted because of what Richard was doing within the Jani.
Wow. So Richard might be responsible for his parents' deaths. That's a whole other level of messed up.
Yeah, it really adds this layer of personal tragedy to Dan's quest, right? It's not just about stopping some shadowy organization anymore. It's about confronting the legacy of his own family, these like sins of the past that are impacting his present.
Yeah. And in the middle of all this emotional turmoil, they stumble upon Richard's cloning lab.
It's a chilling discovery, right? They're face to face with the physical manifestation of Richard's ambition, like this potential for rewriting history itself.
It makes you think how much of our past is truly fixed and how much of it can be changed, you know? Subject to interpretation and, in this case, manipulation.
Right. And then there's the ethical implications of bringing back figures from the past. Could they even adapt to our modern world? Or would they just disrupt everything?
These are questions that, you know, science fiction has been exploring forever, but in these excerpts, it feels so much more real, so much more immediate, especially with the technology we have today.
Yeah, it's not so far-fetched anymore. And just as Dan and Roland are grappling with all of this, the facility gets sealed, trapping them inside with those cloned figures.
It's like they've been thrown into a pressure cooker, both literally and figuratively.
Right.
They're facing immediate danger, but they're also confronting this potential for a historical and genetic apocalypse.
The stakes are incredibly high, both for their own survival and for the future of humanity.
And it's not just Dan and Roland who are in danger. What about those senators who are abducted? They're not just sitting around waiting to be rescued.
That's right. Senator Acosta, despite being terrified, she actually steps up as a leader. She rallies the other captives and, with the help of her aide, Cameron Michaels, orchestrates this daring escape.
It's like this experience has awakened something in her. She's gone from being a pawn in the Novensiles game to actively fighting back.
Yeah, it's a great example of how adversity can bring out our inner strength. Even when we're facing fear and uncertainty, we have the power to choose how we respond.
It's inspiring. And her escape doesn't go unnoticed. Donnie, Liz's partner at the FBI, has been investigating the abductions, and she gets this cryptic message from that mysterious source, DB.
DB, right.
So it seems like we have multiple investigations that are all converging on this one central conspiracy. And Donnie's investigation raises another question. Who is DB? What's their role in all of this? Are they trying to help hinder things, or are they manipulating events for their own purposes?
It's another layer of mystery that keeps you guessing.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we're constantly trying to figure out who's on what side and what their motives are.
Exactly. And just as Danny arrives at that abandoned facility, the senators make their escape. But there's something off about the way those guards are behaving.
Yeah, it's almost like they're intentionally letting the senators get away. Like they're firing their weapons, but they're purposely missing.
Right, exactly. It makes you wonder, are those guards actually working for the Novensiles?
Yeah.
Or are they being controlled by someone else? It's another example of how the lines between friend and enemy are constantly blurred in this story.
Yeah, you never know who to trust. And as the senators make their daring escape, back in that underground lab, Richard decides to reveal his true plan to Dan and Roland.
He admits to manipulating everything for years, using his position in the Jani and his influence over Senator Kotler to achieve his goals.
Wow.
It's a confession that shows just how ruthless he is. He's willing to sacrifice anything, even his own family, to get what he wants.
It's not just a confession, it's like a betrayal of epic proportions. He tells them that the key to their escape is hidden somewhere in the lab, and then seals the facility, leaving them to die.
It's a brutal move, but it also offers a glimmer of hope.
Right.
By giving them a clue, Richard's basically giving them a chance to survive. It's twisted, but it suggests that he's not completely heartless.
It's such a mix of emotions, right? On one hand, he's condemning them to death, but on the other, he's giving them a fighting chance.
Yeah, it's complex.
Yeah.
And as he seals them in, he mentions something about Dan and Roland being put together for a reason.
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean by that? Is there something special about their partnership that he's recognized?
It's like he's setting them up for some specific role in his grand plan, even as he's leaving them to die. It's a mind game on top of everything else.
It's a reminder that Richard is always in control, always manipulating things from behind the scenes.
Right.
And it leaves us wondering, what is his end game? And what part does he see Dan and Roland playing in it? So we're left with this crazy situation.
Right.
Dan and Roland are trapped. Liz is racing against time, and the Novensiles are closing in.
It's really intense, and it's amazing how these excerpts manage to weave together all these different elements, ancient history, cutting-edge tech, family secrets, political intrigue.
Yeah, it's like a tapestry,
Right.
All those threads are connected to something bigger.
Exactly, and it's in these final excerpts that we really see those threads start to come together. We see how each character, responds to these crazy circumstances, and it reveals their true nature under pressure.
Yeah.
Let's start with Dan and Roland, right? They're stuck inside that sealed facility, facing a ticking clock, and those cloned figures are lurking in the shadows. What are they going to do?
Yeah, it's like a classic survival scenario, but with a twist. They're not just fighting the elements. They're surrounded by this potential for a historical and genetic earthquake.
Right. But remember that cryptic clue Richard gave them? The key is in the room. Well, it turns out to be more literal than they thought.
Oh, yeah. They discover that one of the airlocks was damaged in the explosion, and it created this small gap that they might be able to, pry open.
It's like a tiny glimmer of hope in this seemingly hopeless situation.
Yeah.
But it's going to take all their ingenuity and probably a lot of luck to make it work.
Absolutely. And while they're working like crazy to open that airlock, Dan has this moment of reflection,
Yeah.
And he realizes just how much his involvement with the Jani and the Novensiles has put Liz in danger.
Oh, man. You can really feel the weight of that realization.
Yeah.
He's been so focused on uncovering the truth, he didn't fully grasp the risks he was exposing her to.
It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned actions can have these unintended consequences, especially when you're dealing with forces as powerful and unpredictable as the Novensiles.
Yeah, for sure. Meanwhile, Liz is on her way back to Senator Kotler with Jeffrey, trying to save his family before the Novensiles get there.
It's amazing how the story keeps these parallel narratives going.
Right.
It keeps you on the edge of your seat, wondering if they're going to make it, if their paths will cross, or if they'll be crushed by these forces that are closing in.
Yeah. It's like watching two trains speeding towards each other on the same track.
Right.
You know they're going to collide, but you have no idea how it's going to play out.
Exactly. And back at Senator Kotler, Liz and Jeffrey are about to uncover the real horror of Richard's plan. Christoph finally reveals what's going on with those cloned figures.
Okay, so what is it? What does he tell them?
Well, they discover that Richard hasn't just been cloning ancient rulers, he's been cloning himself. They find this whole chamber filled with duplicates of Richard, just like suspended in some kind of stasis.
Whoa, an army of Richards. It's creepy, and
Yeah.
it really speaks to the depths of his obsession with power, with control.
Yeah.
Like, he's trying to cheat death to ensure that his legacy continues no matter the cost.
It's wild, and it raises all these questions about the ethics of cloning, genetic manipulation. Like, what does it even mean to be an individual?
Right, right. It's deep. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, they stumble upon a clone of Dan.
A clone of Dan.
Yeah.
That changes everything. What's Richard's plan for his grandson? Is this some twisted way to control him, to replace him, or something even more sinister?
Yeah, I don't know. It's mind-blowing. Like, if there's a clone of Dan out there who's the real Dan, it really blurs the lines between identity and individuality.
It's like looking in a distorted mirror and seeing this version of yourself that's both familiar and totally alien.
Yeah, and it makes you question who you are, what makes you unique.
Exactly. But before Liz and Jeffrey can even process all of this, the Novensiles attack Senator Kotler.
Oh, man.
It's chaotic. It's violent. And it shows just how ruthless the Novensiles are. They're not just a bunch of intellectuals obsessed with history. They're a real force to be reckoned with.
Yeah. Liz and Jeffrey barely escape. They run into the woods, and the Novensiles are right behind them, hunting them down.
It's like a classic chase scene, full of tension and suspense. They're outmatched, but their desperation to save Jeffrey's family keeps them going.
They manage to evade capture for a while, but eventually they get cornered in a parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And Liz, in this moment of pure adrenaline, she attacks the guards.
Wow.
And that's when things get really crazy.
You can feel Liz's anger and frustration just boiling over. She's been pushed to her limit.
Yeah.
It's raw, it's visceral, and it shows a different side of her character.
She's tapping into this, like, primal instinct, this fierce protectiveness that comes from the threat to the people she cares about.
Exactly. And just when it seems like all hope is lost, the cavalry arrives.
The cavalry.
Yeah, local police and SWAT teams show up, along with this mysterious helicopter.
Wait, who sent the helicopter? Is this a rescue or something else?
It's not clear who's in control. Are these legitimate forces responding to the crisis? Or are they somehow connected to the Novensiles? We don't know.
It's like that classic question, who can you trust? Because in this world, the lines between good and evil are always shifting.
Exactly. And while all this is happening, Dan and Roland finally escape from that underground facility. But they're not out of danger yet.
Right.
They find themselves in this vast, abandoned section of Cheyenne Mountain, and they don't know where they are or how to get back to the surface.
And they're not alone.
Right. They encounter these soldiers who seem to be searching for something or someone.
It's like they've stepped out of the frying pan and into the fire. Who are these soldiers? Are they allies or enemies? And what are they doing there?
We don't know. The story leaves us hanging, with more questions than answers. It's a classic cliffhanger ending that makes you want to know what happens next.
Yeah, and these excerpts may be fictional, but they bring up some really important questions about our own world. Questions about the power of knowledge, the ethics of science, and the dangers of unchecked ambition.
It's like the story is holding up a mirror to our own society,
Right.
reflecting our fascination with power, our thirst for knowledge, and our capacity for both good and evil.
The story of Dan Kotler and the Novensiles is a reminder that the choices we make, the paths we choose, can have these ripple effects that we might not even anticipate.
Yeah.
It's a call to action, urging us to pay attention to the forces at play in our world, to use our knowledge and our voices to create a future that we can all be proud of.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive bystanders, we're active participants in shaping the story of humanity. And it's up to each of us to decide what role we want to play.
Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive, the Novel Aftershow. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with your fellow book lovers and leave us a review. And visit kevintomlinson.com/books to dive into your next adventure.